episode of the Mindsets podcast. I am your host, Angus Cook, and you are joining me on episode 42. Today I'm joined by Harry Mackarness, also known as Resurgent Harry. I will pass over to him to do his own introduction, but before then I just wanted to say a massive thank you for everyone that's tuning into this episode, but also to those that are following on the social media. That's at Mindsets_podcast, and I recently checked on the Instagram the other day, and we're very close to the 1,000 follower mark, which I personally think is crazy. I think it gets lost a little bit sometimes in today's day and age, that, 1,000 followers isn't that much. But for something like a podcast, if I was doing this in a room full of 1,000 of you, I would be very, very nervous. I have the pleasure of just doing this with no one else in the room other than Harry. So for those of you listening along and following along, I really do appreciate it. Now I'm going to stop waffling and I'm going to hand over to Harry to do his own introduction. But I hope you enjoy this episode. It's a good one.
Cheers, mate. So I'm Harry Mackarness, known on social media as Resurgent Harry, which I think people are probably more likely to know. You only recently had to add your surname into Instagram. If you wanted to get the blue tick, which I pay for, I'll happily say that up front. So I was in the army for 10 years, and then I worked in the corporate world for a bit, and then I decided to quit my job and go traveling at the end of last year. I think I had just, frankly, lost any enjoyment in the London grind during the sort of inflationary crisis and working in a job that I didn't feel that I was particularly appreciated in the role that I was doing. And so I caution to the wind and decided to go traveling, met some incredible people, went to some amazing places. I think probably a little bit off-piste compared to other people's travels, or, a bit of a delayed gap year. And I think the most interesting thing that came from that, I went to Ukraine, I went to Ecuador, which even at the time I thought, Ecuador, it'll be okay, but actually was in a state of emergency. So just really, really triggering my mum, basically, when I told her where I was going. And although she wasn't surprised. And it was just a really interesting year for me this year to see how many people out there resonated with the same story. Because I sort of wondered if I was being a bit self-indulgent by taking a gap year at 35 and saying to people, oh, hey, look, I was actually hating my life and doing this stuff. What do I do about it? Well, grab this opportunity and just go for it. The amount of people that then resonated and were like, God, you know what? I need to do the same. I'm fed up with it. And then you meet these incredible people, both in the UK or traveling. Just a truly, truly fantastic year. And I've got a whole load more stuff planned as well, which I probably won't go into that much detail about yet because it's going to be a bit of a surprise. But it has been a year where I have changed my outlook on what is possible and what is achievable based on stuff that I knew was totally achievable and possible, but which wasn't willing to go and do. And I think that was a huge turning point in my view of how I'm going to take my life forwards, I think, essentially.
I think one of the things that's so easily, that people will resonate so easily with in that is everyone has goals. Generally speaking, coming to a podcast like this, you're probably aware of that. You're probably looking to find how to hit your goals or how other people have done theirs, have achieved theirs. With that sort of mentality, you are always looking for that push to help you get there. And I think that's why people are going to find your story particularly interesting, not just from the interesting things that you have done along the way, but why you got to that point and how you then crossed that line effectively. Now, before we find out more about Harry's past, we start this episode off with the way that we start all the episodes off, and we do a thing called show and tell. If show and tell wasn't something you did at school, I'm really sorry, because I used to really love it. But effectively, every guest brings something on, and I'm not allowed to know what it is. So it's a surprise to me, it's a surprise to you. And they're going to talk about this thing. For some people, it can be a lucky charm. For some people, it can be an array of things that they may have done or want to do. And I said array. That is exactly what Harry has brought for us. So do you want to take us through your show and tell, and I'll ask questions on what you brought?
So I wasn't really sure what was going to be the thing that really... I don't think there's a single item that necessarily is a sort of, a core thing for me. And so I brought a few things that just take you through various stages of life, but I think have driven little bits of why I am or who I am today, and this is why. So
awesome. What I will say as well, while Harry's just grabbing that, if you are listening to this on a normal podcasting platform like Spotify or Apple, whatever, they're not sponsoring. I should really run through all of the list of where you can listen to this, but you can check it out on YouTube. It's still at mindsets_podcast. So you can have a look. Otherwise I will do my best audio description of what we're looking at with Harry.
Okay. So item number 1, this, which actually probably a lot of people will never have really seen or been party to. So it's a lacrosse stick. And I think for me, it's a really interesting point at where I changed my view of what competitive sport and team sports and team activities look like. So I took up lacrosse I took up lacrosse at university, and it's one of those sports that's definitely a bit of a, university sport, and, it's not necessarily the sort of most mainstream sport, but at school I had played every other sport, and I mean, you have to, and, I went to a big boarding school where they are absolutely rigid about sport as well. So we played everything. Went to university, started playing this, discovered actually I was pretty good at it, went for England trials, things like that. But the people that I met I was at Bristol, and the people that I met in the lacrosse club, both men's, women's, and the sort of mixed, which is very much just a social group, are the people who are to this day my, closest, oldest friends. And it was such an interesting moment for me when I looked back on it, because when you said to me, bring something for show and tell, and I was thinking, right, well, what's the point in my life where really definitive moments? And I was trying to think through school, and actually nothing really jumped out. I was like, well, it was kind of just school. And I'm sure there are some interesting things, but for me, this is a real turning point, because it was that first time you are very independent because you're going to university, went to go and play a sport, which obviously you don't have to at university. A lot of people don't. Trying something new, learning something new, picking it up, being quite good at it, but also just having to absolutely graft at it. To try and be as good as some of the guys that had already been playing for years, or the American guys that were at university. We had an absolutely ruthless coach, Canadian guy, shout out Trav, I know he'll watch this as well, who's just written a book about how he was coaching us as well, and how he had to he came from Canada where it's a huge sport, and he had to whip a bunch of sort of middle-class Hooray Henrys at Bristol into being able to go and win the national championship, which we did. And when you are a sort of hard partying student, and then we went to training, 5-6 times a week, and it was sprints. Every day there was sprints. Every day there was burpees. Every day there was everything. And it was the ability to combine all those things, but also to reprioritize what you're doing in life. And I think that then made a huge change to my future life and what I chose to do as a thing, and probably how I live my life now in terms of prioritizing things, especially fitness, around the fact that I am certainly no longer at the point where I can go out and drink 20 pints and then go do sprints the next day. Not a chance. I mean, I was pretty bad at it when I was like 20, but at 35, not a chance. If I drink 10 pints, if I look at 10 pints, I'm bedbound for about 3 days. So yeah, I think that was one of the real turning points in my life, was for both team activities, but also prioritization of what I like doing.
Awesome. And with the sort of, it sounds already, and I'm obviously going to take this stance to help us through the story, it sounds like it was a bit military in the coaching style. And I guess that kind of plays in, because I know what's coming. I can see kind of some things that look a bit military. It could be coming up in the next part of show and tell. But was that style of training something that you actually found you gravitated towards?
Yes. So I think every teenager goes through that phase of, the rebellious phase, every phase under the sun, right? And my dad was in the army, and he'd always pushed, maybe you should do that, maybe you should do that. And obviously I'm like, absolutely not, fuck off, Dad. That's a terrible idea. I don't want to do that. And then, yes, came to a very disciplined a sort of style of training, which I had never really experienced before. Maybe once before with a rugby coach at school who was a Kiwi, actually. So Kiwi and a Canadian were the two who have absolutely, shockingly, really drove this discipline and sense of unity, team spirit, drives that thing, which absolutely is replicated in the military, because everything is about the team in the military. You cannot be an individual. The individual must be able to perform, but without every individual performing, the team falls apart. And in a military sense, people die. So you have to be very, very conscious of that. And it's why people are exceptionally professional in the military. And you hear, it's so funny, because I think there are so many misnomers around the military, because a lot of people, every time I hear the phrase military precision or military grade, it makes me laugh, because I'm like, what? Because it's held together with duct tape, right? When someone tells me something's military grade something or other, I'm like, oh, that's not a good thing. But then if you talk to me about the professionalism of soldiers, the individuals rather than sort of the equipment, I honestly, there is no one I could hold in higher esteem for their ability to get stuff done. And I think when I then got to the end of university and everyone starts applying for jobs, and I'd studied languages, so I'd gone abroad, I'd traveled. A lot of it was just completely on a whim, very much going. People were like, oh, I'm going to go study here and I'm going to do that. I didn't. I went and got jobs, Paris and then Spain, Costa del Sol, absolutely a time of my life. Extremely bad behavior. Came back and thought, this slightly nomadic, slightly I don't know what's coming next lifestyle is absolutely what I love. And I called my best mate and said, mate, look, I need to see you this weekend. It was holidays from university. I was like, I've got some really big news. He was like, oh, cool, me too. And we sort of, met up, sat in the pub, and he was like, right, me first. And I was like, okay, go on then. I was like, I promise you mine's bigger. He was like, I've applied to join the army. I was like, oh, for fuck's sake, so have I. And suddenly there we both were in this thing, and it just made sense that we were, two peas in a pod anyway, in terms of the way that we looked at life. And I had to kind of eat humble pie when I went back home to say to Dad, oh, I have actually applied to join the army. And I went into that in 10 years, which is such a long time when you think about it. And, it's why my knees sound like gravel now. But a fascinating experience, and with both huge positives and huge negatives, and something that I would absolutely go back and do all over again, and probably in exactly the same way, because I think, as I said, it makes you who you are. And those life experiences are pretty ingrained in you at that point. But it also, it turns you into a very different person. And I think you go from, I was absolutely a wild child at university. I mean, really badly behaved all the time. And to any of my friends, if they're watching, do not write anything under this video to say what it is that I used to get up to. But I then became so much more disciplined and just better person from it. And I just needed that, frankly, to be beaten into me, which they did.
And what that's ended up in resulting in is one of the things looks like it's you've got a piece of paper and you've got a piece of metal, which kind of looks like a coin. But what were they given to you for?
So I've got these. Yes, I've got these two items here, which I've just got to be a bit careful with one of them on camera, but I will let you sort of read as such until you know what it is. But yes, one of them is a commendation from a US general for work that I did overseas, alongside some pretty interesting people, both from the US, the UK, all over the shop, in some very sensitive work. And I think that is a real career highlight for me. And this was right at the end of my career, actually. This was right at the other end of the 10 years. But it's such a pinnacle and such a great way to almost bow out, because I'd spent only about 6 months, sort of 9 months to a year in after that. But to be recognized by somebody that senior, so a brigadier general in the US military, in a very significant part of the military, was huge. And I think, we all love to be praised, and we don't praise people enough. And the military is terrible, right? People just get in trouble and never get praised. That's one of the really big things they're trying to change at the moment. But to get a piece of paper like that, which said it, and frustratingly, that is a printout of a picture, because the real version, by the time it had been signed off through the sort of US chain and given to the task force where I was working, I'd already left theatre by this point. And then Kabul collapsed not necessarily immediately, but quite soon after that. So the real version of that got chucked into a box and set fire to, along with a lot of other stuff.
Well, at least you got the photo.
Yeah, I know, right? Because otherwise I wouldn't have those.
Like, I'm fortunate enough where I can look at what I'm looking at, and even though I've told you guys to go and look at YouTube, you can't even see this. If you've seen films, sort of, I don't think Mission Impossible is the right one, but like things like Jack Ryan, this is the sort of document you'd expect to read. It's really cool. I didn't think I'd have something like this in my hand at some point in my life, but there we go.
So, and again, it's one of those things that I really don't like to sort of, blowing your own trumpet is particularly crass, isn't it? But it's really interesting when you do have some moments of self-reflection to go back and look at various parts of your life. And I look, and there are some commendations I've got from people, like I got one from the Prime Minister and things like that as well, which in your mind, it's just a thing that happened and you forget about it. And then someone asks you about it and you're like, actually, do you know what? These are pretty cool things to do. And so the other bit I've got here, and I had to speak to some people to get permission to talk about various things, but this is a sort of a commander's coin, basically, which is very common in the military, especially in the US military, but coming more so in the British military. And so it is from the Special Boat Service for some work that I did when I was attached to them. So I got a plaque with, Harry, thanks very much for all your work with that. And then one of those coins, which is particularly cool.
I was going to say, it's got, well, it looks like I'm assuming I'm okay to say this, it's got a really angry frog on it.
Yeah, well,
What's
because
the relevance?
because they're frogmen, basically.
Oh,
so that's where that comes from. I'm led to believe. And, but yeah, really cool stuff. And, little things that just stick with you. Well, forever. I mean, it'd be great because one day, if I have kids, grandkids, whatever, one day I'll be long gone and they'll dig it out of the box and be like, wow. And I'll have to leave a note with it and say I wasn't in the SBS. I just got given it.
Yeah.
So I don't want anyone to think that I was. When I wasn't. But again, it's these little things that are so small but mean so much. And it's the recognition, for me, it was the recognition at the end of 10 years worth of military service, which had so many different things in between, like, from start to finish of injuries and different theatres I got to go to and bits of the world. But yeah, those were some pretty interesting ones.
Awesome. I know that there's one more thing down there, which is slightly more colourful.
Yeah.
Do you want to just drop that in, and then we'll dive into this?
So my final item is pair of budgie smugglers. Right, other brands do exist, but I think for me, this is one of those things that they actually sent me loads of pairs of these because they'd sort of seen some of my content. But I think one of the things that I love about this this kind of item is it's very much a sort of sign, I think, of who I have become much more of this year. I was already somebody who was very confident in their own ability, but maybe and confident in my in how people viewed me in certain roles. So as an army officer, I was confident that what I was saying, I was confident in my ability, and therefore what I was saying to people, that they would trust that I was coming up with the right ideas, or that my direction was good for the most part. But it's the perception of people when suddenly that doesn't exist anymore. I'm just a random guy on the street now, right? So I will happily, at any point, nearly any point, put a pair of those on, and like in public. If I'm going swimming, do it in a pair of those, because firstly, it's a conversation starter. People immediately are just like, they want to come and chat to you and be like, normally they'll just go, wow, you're brave. Like, what are you saying? But also I think it's just it's an outward sign of confidence that's also an inward sign of confidence, because I don't care how confident you pretend to be, but you're not going to put on a pair of Speedos or budgie smugglers in public unless actually you don't really give a fuck what anyone thinks. And I was just down in Cornwall last week, and every single morning I went and jumped in the sea. Every single morning there's people there, and every single morning I did it in a different pair of budgie smugglers. And it was just so funny because people would just come and talk to you and be like, you are an absolute lunatic. And I was like, thanks. Anyway, where are you from? And it was great. And that to me is a real symbol of who I want to be going forward. Somebody who can just, fuck it, why not? And
one thing that I think is quite interesting about those scenarios is you do it once and it gets a little bit easier the next time, and you do it again, you do it again, you do it again. And I'm not saying that you're never going to have an issue doing it at all, but it's going to get to a point, if it isn't already, where like you don't really think twice about it. But, because I mean, you've done it enough times, and it's that exposure and self-exposure that people
quite literally
people may confuse the confidence for lunacy, but that's from the side where they haven't necessarily done the same level of exposure. And I wonder, as we then go through your story, if that's the sort of discovery you have had and you've had especially in the last year, to kind of put yourself in that situation. But we've kind of spoken through with your show and tell that you went from rugby, a bit of lacrosse. I don't know if there was any other sport when you were younger, but then after university signed up to go into the army. But did it feel like you were just following your father's footsteps, or did it feel like you were going into the army to do something different?
So it's a really good question, and actually one that I probably can't answer that well because I don't necessarily know. But I didn't want to certainly not follow dad's footsteps, right? That wasn't the reason I did it. But, you know, the apple never falls that far from the tree, does it? So I think my vision, or at least what my understanding of what the army was likely to be, aligned with what I like to do. Travel, loads of staying active, you know, lots of sports, lots of just exercise in general. I also think that discipline is something, you know, I've been at boarding school since I was like 8 years old or 9 years old or something. So there was an element that going back into sort of institutionalism and an institution is actually quite comforting. And that definitely played a part in it. And I know that I work well in institutions. That's fine. It just depends on how that institution, you know, is run and is structured. But I also think there was probably a bit of that very cliched, quite naive sort of patriotism, you know, and I still very much am a, you know, very pro UK person. You know, I've worn the flag on my arm for 10 years. There's no reason I wouldn't be. And there are plenty of bad things about the UK, right? But it's still home. And for me, that was I think a really driving factor, was wanting to be able to do something for my home, which, you know, they got their pound of flesh for sure. And yeah, it also just adventure. It's adventure. The army is adventurous. And even if you have the most boring career in the army, and this actually, I think, a really good quote from a friend of mine. I said to her when I was thinking about signing off and leaving the army, I said to her, I've got bored. You know, my days are getting more boring. There's a lot of computer time. There's a lot of whatever. And she genuinely just said to me, and she turned around and she went, you need to remember this. Your most boring day is more interesting than my most interesting day. And that has stuck with me. And I think that's actually so true. And just the lifestyle of it. The lifestyle is great up to a point, and then you need to work out if it fits for you. And there are sort of natural feed out times during it. And I always said I'd stay till it wasn't fun anymore. And that's what I did.
With that then, as you travel and you do very poorly, I guess, in the army to stay in the same junior role that you begin with and not go anywhere. So I know that there's certain things you can and can't talk about, but in the direction that you initially took when you were in the army, what were you sort of being asked to do? How did you train for that? What's that?
Yeah, like? So I basically post university and going to Sandhurst. Sandhurst has 3 intakes a year, and they're sort of, they rightly or wrongly have degrees of difficulty, not officially, but you have your immediate post-university crew, which is September intakes, which is known as the thrusters intake. It's all the people who have done the OTC and are really keen. They go straight from university and going on that. And I thought, absolutely not. That sounds dreadful. I want to go in with other people who know nothing about the army and do that. So I did a ski season and then went to Sandhurst. And when I turned up, it turned out I picked up an injury while I was skiing, actually quite a bad one. Had fractured part of my like hips and back. Yeah, but I hadn't realised it. So I basically cracked on at Sandhurst and then started to get to a point where I was like, there's some weird pains here that probably shouldn't be. And it's a very hard institution and environment to describe unless you've been in it, but it is your everything, because you wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning or whatever it is. And we used to have to go, and there'd be a piece of tape on the corridor, on the floor in the corridor outside. And you all stand there, and you had a bottle of water, and you have to drink a litre of water and sing the national anthem. And I absolutely love it. Right, it's just so bizarre, but it is such a unifying thing that brings everybody together. And you all day, you're just in uniform, you're running around, you're doing all these different things. And then in the evening, what are you doing? Well, there's probably no phone signal. The Wi-Fi is probably terrible. You're not even allowed your phone at the beginning, or you weren't then. You would be allowed to use it in the evening, and you'd put your headphones in, and you would sort of try and FaceTime people while you were ironing. And that was your only chance to speak to people. So then to have to go into the rehabilitation unit for a term is absolutely crushing, because you feel like it's slipping away from you, and you see the people you joined with progressing forwards, whereas you're just standing still. And it was while I was there that, with a bunch of other guys actually who I'm still really, really good friends with, and who went on to do some really impressive stuff in the military, all injured. And we actually then got recruited to go to the Parachute Regiment, or to consider it, to apply for it. So I threw caution to the wind. I actually had a confirmed place in a different unit, and I decided to get rid of that and apply to the Parachute Regiment. Was successful, got through, and then went up to go and do the parachute selection, which is called P Company, and then basically broke my ankles while I was up there.
Can I ask? I say I don't want to sound like. I do want to sound like, because I want everyone to know that I am. As the village idiot, when you say the Parachute Regiment, is it that it is your job in certain situations to jump out the back of the airplane, armed, ready to hit the ground and go?
Yeah, so the army is broken down into loads and loads of different sort of forces, as it were. And the Parachute Regiment is along with the Royal Marines and some various other more secret bits, are your first line troops. So they are parachute trained. They are there on high readiness. There was always a battalion on high readiness. So if something kicks off, they already have, their kit is packed and it is literally waiting. It's in their room, or potentially even in like a central storeroom, and they will go straight to an airframe and go and jump out the back of it wherever they need to be. Now, that hasn't actually happened in a really long time, because that's not the world we live in, hasn't required it necessarily. And it's also obviously if they can't land the plane somewhere, right? So first thing is normally they will jump in and their aim is to secure an airfield, and then everybody else can get flown in. But yeah, the Parachute Regiment is held to a totally different standard of fitness. You must complete this selection course to go and do it and be allowed to go and jump out of planes. And the guys are absolute lunatics, absolutely brilliant, incredible, like top tier soldiers and officers. And so when I got injured, and basically it turned out to be a really permanent injury, and was told I couldn't stay with that cat badge anymore, I was going to have to transfer or leave the army. Absolutely crushing. I mean, you have worked so hard to get into this extremely elite unit. And you also believe in your own mind that it is the only unit worth going to. And everyone believes that about their own units, right? Every unit will tell you that they're the only one worth going to. So but I was a junior officer, and this was absolutely crushing. And it happens to a lot of people. So then the thing is, I was then fortunate enough that I was able to stay in the army, but I was told I had to transfer my role. So going from infantry, bloke on the ground with a rifle. And I was told, because my ankles were screwed, and I think this actually probably speaks again to people who put themselves in these positions, that I broke one ankle, just took a lot of painkillers, carried on going on the selection course, didn't tell anyone I'd hurt it. And then because I was putting so much pressure through the good ankle, the second one, it literally exploded about a week later. And I did another sort of 4 or 5 days on the course, but it got to the last day that I stayed on for, and I'd had to sleep in my boots the night before because I couldn't get them off because the swelling was so bad. And looking back, right, what a stupid thing to do. And it is that pushing through injury that, as you get older, you realise is the dumbest thing you can do, because that is now a lasting injury. I don't have any ligaments left in either of my ankles, and that will never fix. Ligaments don't regrow. So, but at the time, it was all I wanted to do, and I just needed to do it. And then I was told, right, you got to transfer. And I was like, well, what's the point? And then I was extremely lucky, because my commanding officer put out the call to the rest of the army and said, hey, look, we've got this guy. Here's his stats, basically. Anyone interested? And basically the entire army came back and said, yes, we'd love to see this guy. And I was like, wow, I was not expecting that. So I went over to the cavalry, which is obviously back in the day was horses, but now armoured vehicles. And I got a chance, which is quite rare in the army, that I got to re-choose my trade, knowing more about the army, because I'd been in for a couple of years at this point. And I decided to apply to a regiment called the Light Dragoons, and they accepted me. And I did the next 7 years, I think, 6-7 years with them. And it was fantastic. I got the chance to meet and work with the most incredible people, to travel the world, go absolutely everywhere, and to just get opportunities that I would never have had otherwise. And while I was there, I have broken my ankles now, God knows how many times, right? And that's a part of the reason as well why I ended up leaving the army in the end. I thought there's only so much you can put your body through. And all of these different things just drive you. You have to push yourself through them. And some of the guests that you've had on here before who are, absolute tier 1 level athletes who will know this far better than I do. But for me, this was my career on the line. And if you can imagine living at essentially army school for a year, where you get up at 5 and get about 11 o'clock every night, and all you do is think. And then someone tells you, oh, you might not be able to do this anymore because you're injured. your whole world crumbles, and you have to be exceptionally resilient, which I don't think I was to begin with. And I had to kind of drag myself up by my bootstraps, essentially, and be like, get a grip. It's not over. You just keep going. Yeah, and then I went to this new regiment, and shockingly, it was great, and everything was wonderful. And, it was one of those things that you build it up in your head, like, oh, I don't know if I want to do this or not. You go and do it, and the world takes you in a different direction, and it's equally interesting with the people, the places, travel.
As you were building that resiliency through, I guess, your injury and the risk of having to figure out what else you're going to do with your life, in the army, especially if you're in there for a given amount of time, and 10 years is a good stint, your rank is obviously going to change as well. Did you find that with your rank changing, there was a bit of a responsibility to display that resiliency to the people that you're now taking on and kind of managing, leading as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think because we also actually had other people that came and looked at the regiment who had gone through exactly the same process from the same, from the Parachute Regiment as well. And I was able to use both my experience in terms of having been injured a couple of times by this point to be better at managing my soldiers or junior officers when they got injured, because you understand it. And I think up until the point where if you have never had a serious injury, but you work in a very high-paced physical environment like that, it's easy to brush them aside and say, oh, come on, it's not that bad. Oh, you can come for the run today. Or yeah, we'll go out on that tab. Just put 40 kilos on your back and we'll just cross the thing. Once you have actually done it and been in rehabilitation for a year, having your whole body stitched back together, you are so much more willing to say to somebody, it's all right, mate, you can take today off. Like, we're okay. Go and see the doctor. Go see the physio. Like, I'll book you in for a physio. Because you don't want somebody else to have to go through the same thing. And I had some bosses who were absolutely terrible at that and who really just didn't understand it at all. Not good man managers. And then I had some who were completely the opposite way. And, I'm sort of hesitant to give them a shout out on here, but honestly, so the current commanding officer of the Light Dragoons, a chap called Colonel Dan Lenner. And I hate to say this, Dan, but yeah, probably the best boss I ever had. The man is super fit, super robust. He was, I think, in his 40s, and he could beat any person in the squadron on a fitness test. And you had 18-year-olds up to, same age as him, and he would absolutely just smash everyone on a fitness test. And but he also was not afraid of putting down, a good few drinks the night before as well, and he would still do it. I just don't know how he did it. Physically, I'm just not wired that way. But he was brilliant at the fact that we all thought, oh God, this guy's gonna be a nightmare, because he took transferred in and look how fit he is, look how strong he is. And he's very driven. He's done his commando course. This is gonna be quite tough, and he's not really gonna accept this. If one of our soldiers got injured, I would go to him and be like, hey Dan, this guy and this guy, we really shouldn't think. And his first response would be, absolutely, don't bring them on the thing. Why on earth would I want to injure them on a training run? Which means that I couldn't potentially take them on operations if the balloon goes up. I'd be like, don't be stupid, of course not. Which is such a change to some of the previous bosses I've had who were like, no, he's bluffing it. Absolutely, get him out there. He's just lazy. He's lazy. I was like, I don't think he is, but and I think we're all guilty of having applied that logic to things before.
100%. And even to the extent of, I know you've just been talking about broken ankles. I have had, through my young sport career, I had quite a severe number of injuries. As I grew, my body wasn't really keeping up with me, which sucked. And I feel like I lost a few opportunities as a result of that. But even now, having gone through all of those injuries and gone through the mental cycle of the injury as well as the physical cycle, I recently discovered that shin splints weren't a myth.
Right? God, no.
And the thing is, I always thought, well, knowing what a shin splint is, which is effectively inflammation, take a couple of ibuprofen and get on with it. And so I did. And what I have ended up doing is potentially causing a stress fracture. And now I'm in this loop where I'm a lot older, I'm a lot wiser, and I'm still just as pissed off and bored of not being able to do what I want to do. And it's one of those where I push through it, knowing that I shouldn't push through that sort of thing. And you do get guilty with it because you kind of get stuck in this process of, for me, my training recently has been such a fundamental part of something that I look forward to every day and something I'm doing every day, that I don't want to stop it for any reason.
And it's such a danger, because that's exactly it. And even, for some people, it's because you're driving towards there's a specific goal at the end of it, big one at the moment, high rocks. Firstly, I don't think there is a single person on Instagram who apparently isn't doing high rocks at the moment. But that is a fixed point in time that you must be fit for to go and do this activity. And therefore people are absolutely loath to take a week or 2 weeks off training without necessarily considering the long-term factor of, if you were to take 2 weeks off now, you can still do that at high rocks. If you don't take 2 weeks off now, you're going to have to sell that ticket on to somebody else, and you're going to have to do the one in 3 months after that, probably somewhere further away, because you've pushed yourself through the injury. And again, Sandhurst, the military has become very good at trying to, and actually I would say potentially it's gone too far in some ways, of trying to mitigate injuries and reduce the injury rates. But shin splints is so common because you turn up on day one and they give you a pair of boots. And most
they're not like, again, there are other options out there, but they're not like a pair of Hokers.
No,
nice and comfortable.
No, they're not. Although they get better and better every year, right? The boots do get better, but you're walking around them every day. And so if you think the difference between when you're at home and you walk around, or if you're just going to work, right, and you've just got a pair of either smart, formal shoes on, or a pair of trainers, right, you're absolutely fine. If you were to suddenly strap a kilo to each ankle, and every day from the moment you got up to the moment you went to bed, you had that on there, it's unsurprising that you start to create extra wear and tear. And then remove the flexibility, because obviously they're high up to give you ankle support. And suddenly shin splints is that and hip injuries are the two biggest issues that people get when they're going through training. And they will go through it and they will take ibuprofen and they will run through it. And you're running in boots as well, which is a totally different thing because it's flat footed. They're not designed to like run. And as you say, they are not cloud monsters, right? They are solid rubber heels with like strapped around your ankles, and potentially you're carrying weight. So your whole body is learning to re-move again. And shin splints inevitably develop into stress fractures, and stress fractures is the number one cause of, or the number one injury in all military training establishments. I think I'm right in saying. So they try and find all these different ways to do it, and even from as basic as increasing the servings of, or the availability of things like milk, and you get snacks right throughout your day at Sandhurst because you are burning so many calories. So random boxes full of food just turn up in your bedroom at night, or like in your corridors. And of those, they will have kind of, chocolate milk and things like that. And there's always a new one every year, and some new company gets the deal for it. But predominantly it's something to give you a bit of protein and calcium, because they need people to strengthen their bones. And they always say this before you go, that we now, people who are 18 and about to go to Sandhurst will probably be even worse than I was at 18, but we don't live the physical lives that people used to live. We don't get the sun exposure we used to live, and a lack of vitamin D leads to more brittle bones. People sit far more often. In our free time, we're not outside doing stuff a lot of the time. We are just, sitting on the sofa or watching TV or on our phones or just chatting to people or whatever. And that leads to so many injuries going through training. So for anybody, and I'm sure there probably will be people who watch this who are actually interested in joining the military, and I would say really basic strength training that gets you out there, as well as just sorting out your nutrition as early as possible, is one of those things that will just stand you in such good stead. That and glute exercises. And this is one thing that people never talk about. It is okay to go on that machine, right?
I call it the
sus machine. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I was going to call it something else, but I thought, no, that's but yes, the sus machine. It is totally fine to go on it. In fact, do it, because guess what? It means your knees won't cave inwards when you're running, when you're squatting, when you're everything else. Your glute strength, and any physio anywhere in the world will tell you that glute strength is the one thing that brings everyone down. And the PTIs used to do it to us in the rehab. You'd stand on one leg and they would just poke you in the side of the glute, and you would, guess what? You'd fall on the floor, and they're like, your glute's not strong enough. Get a TheraBand round and start doing crab walks, and you'll be fine.
Well, there we go. Now, that kind of, as a physical side of things, we can see the injury sort of understanding is something you developed and actually helped you out in other areas with your understanding of your own body. But one thing, as much as sort of military and I guess war has changed through the years, and the way that we see it now is very, very different. But that doesn't mean to say that while you're in the military, you probably are going to see some pretty fucked up shit at some point. If you get into a situation where, you have to do what your training taught you to do, which is a huge mental impact. And especially when you go through your training, there's a lot that you have to adapt mentally, both in the way that you handle yourself, But that is also something that you have mentioned to me before this. You were in very different scenarios, and you have seen and had to go through certain things which the everyday person that may even be listening to this podcast can't even imagine. What's that journey like? And obviously stick to what you can say.
Yeah, I mean, so I would say you're completely right when you say that, you have to, the military is quite good at getting you used to the idea of going to these things. So now again, a really strange one is that people in the military will say that they're devastated that they never got to go to war, right? Because that's what they joined for. Whereas people outside the military would be like, oh, thank God you didn't have to go. And a very weird dichotomy. And with the end of combat operations in Afghanistan, it really, there's a lot of people out there who are essentially the jarhead. If you remember that movie, like the jarhead generation, who were geared up. I've got goosebumps just thinking about it, because they joined up to go and do this. And I remember being told, we were in training and they said, right, combat ops are ending today. It's going to get announced. But that doesn't change the way you train. And so things like when you're doing your medical training, so medical training, it's not just, basic first aid. You're doing how to tourniquet someone's leg if it's been blown off, right? And, this is the realities of this sort of thing. And I'm glad that I've never really had to deal with sort of some of the worst sides of it. But they get, the way that they do it is they bring in like amputees from the army, right, who come in and then they make them up with like full studio makeup, like fake blood everywhere. So you'll be on an exercise, you're patrolling through, you don't even know that they've actually got these casualties in, because half the time they'll just be like, oh, you're an injury, so you like fall on the ground and shout like, oh, my leg. But you'll be doing it, and then something will blow up in a wood block over there, and obviously you hear like screaming, so you run in and there'll be a guy there who actually lost his leg in Afghanistan or something. But honestly, they make your life so difficult, right? They are loving every minute of this, because they are putting you fresh cadet into the hardest possible situation you've been. They are uncooperative, and it's realistic, but they will have all this fake blood everywhere, screaming, shouting like, oh, you've got to help me, don't let me die, don't let me die. And you're there being like, trying to be really like responsible, like flicking through this little book that you haven't memorized yet. And you're like, okay, so now I need to do this, and now I need to do this. But it's the image of it that is prepping you for what you can see. And this, throughout your career, you will get these casualty simulations the whole way through.
Is it, it's like, it is PTSD, but like pre-traumatic stress.
Yeah, I think that's basically, they're just, what they're doing is they're pushing your tolerance further and further. So they are, if you've seen all these things before, you are less likely to be triggered by it the first time you see it. Now, I would also say that on various tours and places I've been around the world, that what I really don't want to do is sort of ham it up, because it's very easy to make things sound sort of bigger than they are.
For sure.
Which I really don't want to do. But some of the places that I got to go to, you are exposed to a lot of really unpleasant, either in real life or imagery. And when you see, especially sort of, reports that come in from things. So certainly in the counterterrorism world, there's a lot of really horrific stuff that goes on there, because you don't see it. And, we see these things on the news, we hear them reported, but the pictures are, normally of a building that's had its walls blown out or its windows blown out. What you don't see is what's inside the building.
Yeah.
Now, I have seen both in real life and images of dead people a lot, and been around it, and it never really was, and this might make me sound like a bit of a psychopath, but like, it was never that triggering to me. It was something that it is deeply upsetting, but it wasn't something that like really sat in my brain permanently, because I think I was programmed to go and deal with these things. I knew what I was getting into. But there is one specific incident which was right towards the end of my deployment, and it was when ISIS, Daesh, whatever you want to call them, had attacked an educational facility, and the counterattack went in, and these guys barricaded themselves in the women's education facility in the Kabul University. The guys then went in there, they realized they were stuck, and they basically killed everyone in there, blew themselves up. And I had quite a big hand in helping to develop things like the women's education program in this university and recruiting people into it, amongst loads of other stuff. But there was work that I had done to do with that. And when you saw the aftermath, it was absolutely horrific. And it was so personal. And I mean, you can hear.
Yeah, there's like, again, if you're listening, there are quite severe goosebumps on Harry's arms right now as he's talking about this.
And I think, you know, it really makes me well up. But it was the first time that I ever really felt something hit me so deeply emotionally. And I remember we spent all day like dealing with the fallout from this and so what was to be done about it, because it's not just a thing where it happens and then it sort of gets cleaned up. And then, you know, there is also, you're running a campaign against these terrorists. So all of that needs to be photographed. It needs to be done for evidence. It needs to be used in exploitative ways to prove how bad the bad guys are. So you are not only seeing the thing, but then having to dealing with like images of it, and you've been there and you've seen it and everything. So I remember I went back to my room and I sat on my bed, and it's, you know, you're in just basically an ISO container that's got some beds in it, and it fits almost the length of the wall, and it was right at the back. So, and it had a gap about maybe that big between sort of the edge of the bed and the wall. And I, for whatever reason, I went and sat on the end bit, and like my knees were touching the wall, and I was just staring at the wall, and I was just crying, like absolutely. I didn't know how to react. I'd never been through such a sort of emotionally traumatic thing. And someone knocked on the door, and it was the doctor. And he opened. He's absolutely like a key part of the task force, because like, he's a huge guy, right? He could, like, honestly, I can't remember what he could deadlift, but it was like in the several hundreds unit of a bloke. And he was like, "You all right, mate?" And I just looked at him. I was like, "I don't think I am." And he was like, "Right." And he like stepped out the door, and I was like, "I don't know where he's going." And then he just like reached around and grabbed 2 cups of tea and came in the room and sat down. And he's like, "Yeah, I thought that might be the case." He's like, "Do you want to talk about it?" I was like, I don't really know what to talk about. I'm like, "I promise I'm not normally like this." And he's like, "Mate, it's fine." He was like, if I told you that everyone here comes and cries in my room at some point every week, so would that make you feel better? I was like, "Yeah, I think so." And it was, I mean, you can probably see like my eyes are sort of slightly going. And I think it's a hugely traumatic event that I will never be able to unsee, unimagine.
I think the thing that catches you off, you can have all of this mental preparedness, and in a very different way, but around grief. Something that I find, I do tend to process grief on a personal level quite differently to other people. And I'm aware that I need to account for that in the way that I talk about things. But I've lost family members, some closer than others. But as soon as I become aware of the likelihood that I'm going to lose someone, I mentally process that very quickly. And therefore, usually at the time of it happening, it doesn't affect me that much. And that's almost like my defense mechanism. But in the occasion where I haven't had the benefit of knowing that I was going to lose someone, and then it happens, it's a totally different form of hit. And it's because you're not prepared for that specific thing. And it sounds like because of your personal involvement in that situation, you weren't prepared for that to happen. And it wasn't conceivable because there was nothing really on the cards that would hint at that specific thing. And,
you know, it was almost, part of it was chance. You know, they weren't deliberately attacking this singular building. It was just happened to be the closest bit to where they were when the thing. So, I mean, it's chance. And we had seen so many similar things that had happened. But this one, for whatever reason, this one stuck. I mean, it hit me like a train, mate. Absolutely hit me like a train.
When did this happen in the grand scheme of your career with the army?
So this right at the end. So, and it's a determining factor, I think, in why I ended up leaving. So this was in 2020. In fact, so this is while everyone was. In fact, it would have been towards the end of the summer 2020. So everyone was out of lockdown in the pear tree.
It was 2-for-1 food.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you know, those Magnums rosé aren't going to drink themselves. So, yeah, it was something that shook me to my core, because suddenly I didn't know who I was. I was not the guy who could deal with everything. I was not the guy who was able to just soldier through everything. But I tried. And, you know, I got home. I didn't tell anyone about it. People knew, and they could see. It was interesting. People said, you know, there's a big change, we've seen a big change in you. And I just thought, well, obviously, of course there is. You know, we've been through all this stuff, and actually there was a lot of this, but I didn't realize just quite how much it had affected me. But because it was still COVID time, we had to go into quarantine when we got back. And the army really screwed this up, right? Because I came back as an individual, so not as part of this sort of the main unit was there because I was attached. So they didn't really have a plan for how to deal with this. Now, I know that COVID, everything was quite ad hoc and no one knew what was going on, but they said, you can't go back to camp, you can't go back to your base to quarantine there because, all the other people, right? So you need to go home. I was like, well, hang on, I'm not going to go back to my parents because I certainly don't. If I've brought back, Afghani COVID, I really don't want to give that to my parents who are, at this point, so, pushing like late 60s, early 70s. Like definitely not something to do. And dad, has had plenty of health issues before. So not something I wanted to do. So I was very lucky that a friend had basically moved out of their flat and into their parents' flat, but they had like a month left on the lease or whatever and said, look, you can stay there. But my God, did I underestimate being left alone with my own thoughts for 2 weeks, 2-week quarantine, 4 days after this had happened.
This is really interesting. I don't know if you were aware, there's a few episodes ago, there's a couple of episodes called Rocket Man or Rocket Man 2 that I did with a guy who was a medic in the army and had literally within a week before he came home and had to go into quarantine, same situation. And it wasn't the best thing for him to do, to sit with his thoughts. Yeah,
it's terrible. I mean, and I'm not exaggerating when I said, there were points when I was looking, being like, these exposed beams look pretty good. Like, nice Fulham decor, but could it hold my weight? And I will actually say the thing that really helped me was Headspace, the app. Because the army had decided it was going to, as a trial, get a load of licenses and you could email them and ask it. I completed that app, genuinely. I don't think anyone's ever completed it, but I was doing it on like 5-6 sessions a day on that, just trying to sort of just bring my thoughts back in line. But I knew it was only ever temporary because it just needed to get me to the end of the quarantine so I could get out of that flat and go and see people. And you can remember, like, I hadn't seen my family or anything by this point yet. So you've been away the whole year. You can't come back for R&R because of the quarantine period, so they just cancelled it. The whole world's going to shit anyway with COVID. I'd been working in the COVID response unit before that in Whitehall, a whole set of different stories, but and then you go through this and you are just, your whole world is collapsing around you. And I didn't know what to do. And I think, I sort of want to, before going any further with the story, I think the key takeaway from all of this, and I want, if anyone listens to this just gets one bit of advice from me, it's if you are struggling with anything, go and seek help. Because it is such a difficult thing for men to do. And I know we're better at talking about it. I know we're better at dealing with it now. And people are more open, but we are still terrible at going and seeing a professional. Every one of your female friends has a therapist, right? And I talk to my girl mates and they're like, oh yeah, well, this minor inconvenience happened today, so I texted my therapist. And to me, I'm always like, come on. But what an idiot, me not having a therapist that dealt with it so early on. And I didn't go and see a therapist basically for a long time. And it took me getting to the point 6 months later where I had been at a party every weekend. It was just getting like more and more out of control. I was just drinking more and more and more and more, completely spiraling. I'd wake up and I'd have like tears running down my face, and I knew something was so wrong, but I couldn't work it out. And I was putting myself like redlining with exercise twice a day for an hour at like 200 beats a minute heart rates, to the point where I'd like push myself and be like, oh, you're only at 190, like for 30 minutes, like that's not enough. And then, yeah, one weekend it all came to a head, and I was walking down the Chelsea embankment, living in Pimlico at the time, and I just got back to my front door and I was like, it's about 4 o'clock in the morning. I was like, I cannot go back into this flat. Like I just can't. I can't go inside. Everything feels wrong. And I was just listening to the same 2 songs on repeat, not even on a playlist, right? I was putting them back deliberately. Like, it's so self-destructive. And these songs I knew would put me into like a more emotionally frenzied state, and just walking around the block. And so eventually I just thought, I can't do this. I cannot live like this anymore. And I walked onto the bridge, went over the railing, and like stood on the edge of that bridge. And I was like, I can't, there's no future. There's no future for me where I'm not like this. And then thankfully I obviously didn't do it.
I've got a question that I wouldn't be able to ask a lot of people. And so I kind of want to take the opportunity to ask you this. How do you put into words, what is it like standing in that position, knowing that you are in full control of if this is the end of your life? And if you like, what what in earth is that situation like?
So for me, honestly, I can tell you the only reason that I didn't do it was because I thought, I can't do this to my family, which actually is making me slightly well up because I don't think I've ever said that out loud. There was nothing that, if it had been just me on this planet, there's nothing that would have stopped me from doing that, because it's not. I think people really misunderstand, and rightly so, because if you've never been in that situation, it's very, you can't know what it's like, and I never thought I would ever be in that situation. But it's not because you are in a, it is not your current state deciding I'm going to do this. It's the fact that you can't see a light at the end of the tunnel. Everybody has good days and bad days, and there are elements of the mental health debate today that don't necessarily take into account that we are humans and have good days and bad days, right? Depression is a very serious clinical issue. Depression is not a bad day, but a bad day can be part of depression. And that line, I really, we'll get cancelled if we talk about this for too much, but I don't really want to go into it, and I just certainly don't want to diminish anybody else's experiences. But I just simply could not see any way that life was ever going to get better, because it was continuing to get worse. And that spiral is so spirally. A bad day leads to a worse day, leads to a worse day. And for me, the only thing that made me actually not think about it was going out and socializing, because I'd be out and we'd go to the pear tree and we'd get absolutely wasted and go to a party, and we'd do it every Saturday. And then you'd wake up and Sunday you'd be like, and hangover on top of it all. But up until the moment where you leave the door to go and actually go and see people, there is nothing that you can think of that is worse than going out and seeing people. You just want to sit in the corner of a room. And it sounds so contrived and really it sounds really, woe is me.
The thing that I find interesting talking about a topic like this is talking about it as a person and saying these things. You probably feel that this is a very individual perspective, but I think the thing that's so appreciated by people that listen to a podcast like this, but also in your personal following, is that actually a lot of people feel these things. And again, to different levels. But there are times when I will freely admit this, there's nothing against any of my friends here, but there are times where I have committed to going and doing something and I actively don't want to go. And I make it there and I'm so glad I went. But I'm sometimes I'm late and I'll say, tube got stuck. I'm really exposing myself here. Sometimes I'll say tube got stuck. But maybe I actually just sat there for 5-10 minutes I don't really want to go.
But it's totally fine to do that, right? There is the power of saying no and the power of saying yes. Both of those things are incredibly important, and they have their own place in everybody's individual lives, because there are people who will predominantly say no to things and who probably should say yes to more things, because they know that actually when they get there they'll really enjoy it. And it's like your mom or your dad would say it to, or whoever, when you were a kid, and be like, I don't want to go, and they'd be like, when you get there you know that you'll have fun. Did you have fun afterwards? Yeah, I did. It's exactly that. But prior to that thing, and as adults, right, it's totally absolutely within our power to be like, do you know what, mate? No, I'm going to sit in my pants and I'm going to watch 20 episodes of something on Netflix because I just don't have the energy. But you've got to be careful that you don't allow that to just get into your norm. And when you are, which is so easy to do for everybody, right, regardless of situation, there's plenty of times when you just think, I can't do this. But when you are in a position where you are actively so terrified of being awake, asleep, alive, with people, not with people, there is no good option. And you feel emotionally like you are, all you want, the whole world is coming in on you and it's weighing on you, but you don't know what it is that's causing you to feel like this. And also you don't understand why. You might know the logical reason, but it is if you imagine, if something happens to you and you get that, the dread knot in your stomach, right? And, we get that, a spot test at school, or, you see your ex across the street, right? And just, that sinking feeling. It's totally unexplainable in terms of its physiological sort of effects on you, but we all know what it is. This is kind of similar to that, but it's all day and it's every day. And you wake up and you just think, another day. Why? Why am I like this? What's wrong with me? Do I have to be here? Wait, hang on, maybe I could not be here. And I would say, like, when I was, like, you know, on your everyday stuff, I would just keep myself busy, and I just knew I was, like, deeply unhappy. But I certainly wasn't suicidal in the middle of the day. But you put a bunch of alcohol on top of that, and at the end of an already really destructive sort of cycle, sort of emotional and mental cycle, and it seems like you're only way out. But I mean, what's even worse, mate, is that I then obviously didn't do it. I stepped backwards rather than forwards. I went into the flat. By this point, this was like a Sunday morning. On Monday morning, I got up and I went to work. And then I had like a pretty big outburst at work at so one of my bosses, pretty senior boss, and my sort of line manager, as it were, basically grabbed me and took me to one side. And I was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have done that. He was like, mate, we're so past that. He's like, come on, let's go outside. So we walked outside out of a secure building. And he was like, mate, you need to talk to someone. He's like, I recognize this. And I was sort of apologizing for the way I'd just behaved. He was like, no. He was like, dude, he was like, I don't give a shit about that. He's like, neither does he. He's like, but like, this is the interjection moment I needed. This is my intervention. He's like, do you want to talk to someone? And I sort of looked at him and I was like, yeah, I think I need to. And thankfully, I don't really know if that's the right word. He had actually been through something similar. He had been in, I won't say exactly what it was because it's very identifiable, but that individual had been in an extremely physically and emotionally traumatic thing that had happened, you know, kind of explosions and stuff like that. Had been through the therapy thing twice. And so he just took me up to one of the side buildings, got on his phone, speed dial the therapist. Within 20 minutes, I was sitting on the phone with a psychiatrist, and they were booking me in for like therapy. And I did therapy solidly for the next, I don't know, I mean, months. And because the benefit, and I think this is one thing that really is why it's so difficult in the real world, is because it's expensive. The army was providing that. You know, these were army psychologists and therapists. My first few weeks, mate, I spoke to a therapist every single day. And you can't do that in the real world because that is thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds. And then finally, yeah, it was I was actually going to bring this in for the show and tell, but I thought it was probably a bit macabre. But, you know, I went on medication. I'm still on it. And it's very low dose, and it's actually sort of similar to an ADHD med, and it basically just helps to regulate your dopamine levels. But what I had no idea, and I got all of this explained to me during the therapy process, is that when you go through a traumatic experience like that, your brain totally rewires itself. You are physically, chemically, a different person to before that experience. And that made so much sense when they told me that, because I had spent so long wondering why wasn't I who I used to be? Why wasn't I the life and soul of the party anymore? Like, I was never the guy that said no to a social event. Like, absolutely not. I was the first guy there, and I'd be dancing on the tables and getting everyone to dance with me. And to the guy that was sitting in the corner of a room, like hiding under a blanket, like terrified of going outside. Like, it's a hell of a change, and I didn't know what to do. And so, yeah, what it turns out is that, you know, they give me this medication. It just brings my dopamine sort of receptors back into whack. And so I don't have these sort of extreme highs and lows anymore. And it's great. And I've actually kind of learned to deal without it because I couldn't take it traveling because it's a controlled drug. So certainly couldn't try to get it into Dubai, for example. And you certainly don't want to be bringing controlled drugs in or out of Central or South America either. So yeah, it's a lot of horrible jail time. But yeah, and so I sort of now manage it. And that's why I'm just so happy to talk about it, because it took me a long time to be able to even admit that I was in therapy. I didn't tell anyone, and certainly the idea that I had like nearly killed myself. I mean, you imagine you tell that to somebody like your nearest and dearest in your family.
I think it especially today, even though, you know, the topic is more spoken about, there's like this stamp. It's like if you look at someone that's deeply, deeply qualified for a certain role, or, you know, you've made friends with, and then at some point they tell you, oh yeah, I went to prison for 5 years. Even if you don't know what it's for, those sort of assumptions, you start to think about what it could have been for.
Yeah.
And so for someone like yourself to turn around and say, oh yeah, I nearly took my own life, if you immediately told me why and you ran me through this whole story like you are now, which you're not going to do on first meeting someone, then it's completely understandable. But you start to think, oh, it could have been this reason, it could have been this reason. And you do get this label, which is completely unjustified.
Yeah, and do you know though, I posted a video on my social media, which kind of, it explained it. Not in the depth that we've just been into, but it explained that there had been a point in my life where I nearly did this. I didn't go into any of the reasons why, like obviously that we've just spoken about, but I just felt that I needed to do it because it felt that people were starting to sort of engage with like just me on social media. And I was like, well, I can't not tell the story because it's such an integral part of who I am. And I made this video and everyone talks about, like, oh, you need like a good hook at the start of your video. You need these, like all these like really nauseating social media things. And it's not even subconsciously, consciously, I did not put any of those things in because I was like, I kind of don't really want anyone to see this. And I was terrified. I had it in my drafts probably for about 3 weeks. And then I picked a really, really busy time. I picked like a Sunday, I think it was like a Sunday evening, but like the football was on, to post it. And when my hands were so sweaty when I went to post this video that like I dropped my phone and I had to put my phone, basically I posted it and I had to like put my phone down and just walk out and I was like, I can't look at it. But the thing is, I had not told 99% of people that this had happened. But it's a very, it's a very vulnerable moment when you tell people this. And I'm okay talking about it now because I've obviously posted it on the internet. But for me, that was actually a great way of sort of, self-therapy because I was able to get this out to a bunch of people who know me and like my friends, my family, so that they could potentially get a bit more of an understanding that I wasn't necessarily brave enough to actually have that conversation with them in person. And I still find it deeply awkward if somebody I know tries to talk to me about it and they go, oh, I saw your video. I'm like, oh, please don't. Like, but the response I got from this video was overwhelming, not only in terms of people, sending really supportive messages and comments, but more than that, it was people who said, I totally relate to this and I am in this situation right now, or I was in this situation last year, or I feel like my life is spiraling out of control and this has helped to slightly anchor my perspective on this. But quite a few people who were like, I'm suicidal right now. Then you come to a whole separate problem, which is that you have basically, someone has told you that this is going on. And if somebody says to you, I'm suicidal, right, I don't care who you are, but it's your responsibility to try and help that person at that moment. But you've also got to be fucking careful, right? Because if you get that wrong, then it is not your fault if that person goes and does that, but you will forever carry that, right?
For sure.
And hence the same with the attack in Kabul, right? It was not my fault, but those people for some reason might have been there due to something that I had done, and therefore I carried that guilt and will forever, but I'm just better at rationalizing it now. But my advice to all of them, to every single one of them, was you need to just go and call a therapist, right? There are emergency professionals who are out there who will speak to anyone any time of day or night. And actually what I'd love, mate, is there's a really great website which has basically a full directory of all the different people you can speak to, and you basically just like click your region, click like what you think roughly is the area you want to talk to somebody in, and it will spin out 20 different numbers. So if I can give you that,
if anyone's listening to this right now and you're wondering what that website is, go straight to the bio or the description of this podcast. It will be in there. You can click the link, or you'll be able to find it through the social media. So
it's an amazing tool as well, because I only found out about it way later on, but it's an amazing tool because it allows you also potentially to find ways to help with somebody who might, if a friend of yours is going through something, there's sort of links on there where you can speak to someone about how to help a friend who isn't necessarily ready to go and talk to someone in therapy. But all these tools exist. You have to go and find them. And when you are in that state, that mental state, the last thing you want to do is actually help yourself. You just want to curl up and make it all go away. Yeah. It's rough.
Yeah.
It's really rough.
I think because we're starting to talk to the people that are listening right now. What I want to bring into is the listener questions. So for those that are unaware necessarily to this podcast, or were unaware that this happens, essentially before a guest comes on, I like to put up a bit of information, sometimes share who the guest is, and give both the guests following a chance, but also anyone that's interacted with the podcast, a chance to ask a direct question to that guest, so you can get some direct benefit or actually hear something yourself. Now, there is a side part to that where I can't ask all the perfect questions. I've done my best. There was a lot of questions this week to sort of get some of those questions or topics covered by Harry. He's done a great job answering some of those for you. There are some that I won't be able to fit in, so I do apologize, but please come back next time. I hope to pick your question then. But we do have actually 5 questions. And I've chosen 5. We normally do 3 because there's some really different angles.
Okay, I'm so slightly nervous about this.
Yeah, fair enough. So this is the other thing as well. The guest doesn't know until I ask them these questions. So the first question comes from Henry. And the question is, what is the most fulfilled moment you've had in life and what caused it?
I mean, that's a seriously good question. The most fulfilled in life I've ever been. I think, do you know what, if I'm answering brutally honestly, I don't know if there is a time that I've ever been really fulfilled, which is a bit double-edged. I think that's potentially a little bit it's sort of sad because maybe I just haven't done, but I think it's what drives me forwards. There is an issue with that, is that you're constantly driving yourself forwards. And I always say to people that, life is not, there isn't a goal that you just get to. It's just goals along the way, and that you don't stop walking along the path, right, until right at the end. And I am not sure that there are moments in time I've been fulfilled, but I think recently, so I think this year was probably, I ended up in Thailand, and actually we haven't even spoken about traveling yet.
There's a question.
I ended up in Thailand, and I went to go for 2 weeks and ended up staying for 2 months because I was just, everything felt so great. I was just training at Unit 27 every single day in Phuket, twice a day. The people, amazing. The food, amazing. There were no worries. And it was the first time in a really long time that I felt like that. I was just working on myself with very few external influences, driving bits of my company forwards, bits of my business forwards, take my personal health forwards, and also just really enjoying time where I just kind of, if I needed it, I could have that little Zen moment and go and sit in an ice bath that was, blocks of ice that are the size of a fridge drawer in there, and go and sit in that. And yeah, I think that's probably the most fulfilled I've been in a very long time. But in terms of life fulfillment, I'm definitely not there yet. There's so much more.
I think that's good though. I think you've made a good point. A lot of people do work towards this big goal, this big dream. You have to be careful with that, because if you actually do someday achieve that, and for some reason you haven't rewired yourself to go for the next thing, then the rest of your life after that is only downhill, and that's dangerous. And
also, if you don't get it, if it becomes out of your reach, then suddenly you end up at this point of being, there's a very dangerous point there where you just think, well, I might as well just stop trying for anything then.
You have to tease yourself with everything you're trying.
Mate, that's it. It's like, when you're running on a treadmill, right? You're not running for half an hour. You're running for 5 minutes, then 10 minutes, then 15 minutes, then 20 minutes. Right?
Exactly that. Well, there we go. Thank you for that question, Henry. The next question comes from, I'm not sure with some of these names. I'm kind of going off what the Instagram handle is.
Okay.
So I'm going to go with Purcell, and we're not talking
I know who that is.
Okay, cool.
So I actually met him in the gym in Thailand.
Oh, awesome. So his question is around the traveling and mental health side. He says, what is it about traveling that you think is so fundamental for mental health?
So I think it's changing your scenery. And if your mental health, mental fitness, or your just general overall well-being, we talk about mental health in a kind of quite a deep sort of sense at the moment, but if you're just a bit sad with where you're at, just not enjoying it, and it doesn't have to be anything deeper than not enjoying life, right, at the moment because of your scenario, make a change. Change one, if not more, of the things that are fundamentals to your life. So the people, the activities, the routine, the location, any of those things. If you change any of those things, suddenly life will change around for you. But it's that sort of staleness that, for me, gets me really sort of worked up. And London, terrible for it for me, because I fall, and I'm sure anybody who is listening to this who is from London will totally get the thing of, it's Thursday, we're going for after work drinks. Oh, it's Friday. Like, well, I'll see you in the pub. Oh, it's Saturday. Well, we're going to go on a big one on Saturday. Or we're going to go to Run Club on Saturday morning, and then we're going to go to the Pear Tree, right? The Pear Tree. I'm sorry to anyone who goes to the Pear Tree Cafe, but I've given that place so many tens of thousands of pounds over the years. But the Pear Tree Cafe, big, right? That place it's so much fun, but it was the same. We did every summer.
Cycle.
Every summer we'd do it, and it was great fun, and the people are great, and you meet so many fun people. But then suddenly you realize you're like, oh my god, it's 3 months and I've done nothing but. And it was for me, it's that doing the same thing every time and then adding in the physical activity. So run club was a really big one for me that allowed me to change my scenario, change my routine on a Friday night from going out to staying in, go running on a Saturday morning at Pure Sport. Loved it. And then traveling, it's exactly that, but you're changing your environment completely as well as your people and your routine. So it's quite a big one. And I think there's also a really big, people like to think they should glamorize traveling and solo traveling, right? Solo traveling on social media, all these people that go and do it, right? It's tough. It's not easy. And do not think just because you're seeing these great videos of people being like, oh, look, here's me with elephants, or here's me like swimming with turtles, right? I did both of those things, right? But the bits in between that are actually really quite challenging at points, because you go, you might be in a hostel and you've booked it for a week, right? And you just think, you get there and you're like, oh my God, this place is absolutely horrendous, or the people are awful, and you don't get any sleep for a week, or you, whatever it might be.
It might even, because I went traveling this time last year. I didn't go solo, so I had the fortune that I had someone else to share the experience with. But if you're trying to do it and you're doing it on a budget, you might be taking the local transport from Bangkok to the islands, for example, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, you get kicked out of the bus with a few locals that don't speak a word of English, and the bus drives off.
Yep.
And you have no idea where you are. You don't have enough charge on your phone to really understand what's going on. You can't talk to anyone. No one really knows what's going on. You just simply have to trust in the fact that another bus is coming at some point. And it does. But that hour and a half that we were sat on the side of the road at 3 in the morning, not comfortable.
So I went to Ukraine, which, not high on the holiday hotspot list at the moment, I think. And, take what you will about my personality from the fact that was like one of the first places I went to visit, and clearly a bit of itchy feet. I wanted to like go and see it. Air raid sirens coming in every single day. Now, I was out there with people that I knew, but getting out there, because you can't fly, right? So you get trains, buses, everything. So it's about 36 hours from London to Kyiv. And I was in, the trains are like overnight trains and sleepers, and you have to share with like random people who don't speak English. And I was on the Polish-Ukrainian border. It was about midnight, I think. No street lights, like this tiny little town, but it's become this sort of hub for people moving across the border, and like totally legally, right? But they have to do all the checks and stuff. And sitting there just thinking, what the am I doing? Like, it's midnight. I'm about to get a train into Ukraine. I know that it's getting like literally bombed at the moment, and I can't use my phone for security reasons. I don't want people knowing that I was there, given like that I worked in the military previously. Just no reason to let people know that I was in Ukraine until after I'd left. And it was so exhilarating, but also terrifying. But again, like for me, pushing myself out of my comfort zone, like taking it back to the question, like pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, for me is what really kind of fires me up and fills my cup. But it's a dangerous one, because again, you become adrenaline chaser. Are you just constantly looking for the next thrill? And I've never really been a thrill seeker, but I do find I thrive in situations that others would find uncomfortable. I think that's probably the best way to say it.
I think it comes from, like you said, the itchy feet in a way. So like you kind of need that adrenaline fill, which is understandable from someone that's been through your training and has had the career that you've had. It's not that surprising to a degree. Yeah, some of it. But
exactly.
Yeah, no.
I could have just gone and sat on a beach or something instead. It would have been far better for my like family's like long-term heart health, I think, than when I got them to drop me at the airport and explain it.
The next question I've got is from Lauren, who was actually a previous guest, and she is very, very much involved in mental health, particularly within athletes, but she has a deep interest in it, and she's actually studying to be she's a doctor. She's doing her medical studies now. So her question is, how have you moved from where there was a time in your life where the ideation of suicide was around to that not necessarily being a thing that you move to in your head anymore?
That's a really good question. I don't necessarily know that I have, because there's definitely moments where you have like dark days, and being brutally honest about it, I'm not sure that that's something that will ever completely disappear, because as I said, like, my brain's been sort of rewired, as they say, and there are times when you do it in good days and bad days. But I think the going through therapy for me was not even necessarily what the therapist was sort of telling me. It was my ability to simply talk out my problems. This for me is great therapy. And I think for most people it is, but we don't do it. There are very few times in life where blokes sit down and just talk very honestly about stuff with each other. Realistically, it's going to be about 6 a.m. around a kitchen table is about the only time that two blokes are going to ever actually admit something to each other. And I think, obviously not that anyone knows what that's like, but those are those really interesting moments into somebody's sort of soul. And I think for me, it was just simply talking it out, understanding that I had a problem. So accepting out loud and to somebody else that I had a problem. Being given some coping strategies, which were not anything specific. It was more just, you have to be mindful of the fact that you've woken up today and it's not a good day. And then also the knowledge that the bad days do go away, right? This too shall pass. And I think that's one of those things that I constantly have to remember to myself is this too shall pass. And, Miles Nazaire from Made in Chelsea, I don't know if you know, but Miles actually has a tattoo saying like this too shall pass on him. And when he got it, we were chatting about it. And I just said to him, I was like, mate, I actually wanted to get the same one. Now, obviously I can't, but understanding that this is a dark corridor with a big window at the end of it. And that corridor was maybe like a couple of days, maybe a week at absolute worst. And just being totally cognizant of the fact that everything's going to make you think that everything's shit, right? And that for me is just where I'm at. So the smallest inconvenience, I'm like, oh God, everything's shit this week. And then slowly go like that. And you have to just grab yourself and be like, bro, level off a bit, grow up. Like, you're having a bad week. You're having a bad week. Wait, it'll get better. It's fine. Go to bed. Just go to bed. Go to bed really early, because then guess what? You're at the next day and you're probably closer to it all getting.
I think it's that thing on a minor level though. It's like you've already mentioned, nothing changes if nothing changes. So if you're in that situation where everything is downward spiral, you are just doing the same thing every day. Try go to bed early, do something different. Start with one small thing and then see if you can build that into it.
Absolutely. And it's like the whole habit forming thing as well. So if you are trying to change like various bits of your life because you know that they are negative influences on you, then just start off really, really small. Like, I do fitness coaching, and so I would never ever try and change somebody's like exercise, their daily routine, their exercise plan, their diet, everything in one day, because they're never going to stick to it, right? You start with, right, let's just change the small habits here. Let's do this. We're going to change the timing of that, so that's going to go in the morning. That's going to be your workout plan. We're only going to do it a couple of times in the first week because you're just getting used to this. And then in 2-3 weeks, we're going to then like really change over your diet. Or maybe we'll do the diet first and the exercise plan later. But taking on loads and loads of new changes, you're never going to stick to them. So just slowly, catchy monkey, and you just, stuff suddenly gets better. But yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. I just think I don't think about it as much anymore. It's not, for me, it's not a way out because I don't need a way out. And I hope that is forever the case. But at the moment, life is good. And then sometimes life is a bit, I get a bit wonky. But the wonkiness will be fine. And I know that it's fine and it's part of who I am.
One thing that I want to say, which is commendable both to you and to anyone else that in life has, or at some point, sadly, does have the point where they are, on the edge of a bridge, either physically or sort of metaphorically. You are, I guess the term is breaking a window. I don't know if you've heard that, but sometimes you notice something about the way someone says a specific word, and once you notice it once, you can't unnotice it. It's the same with that situation. Once you've been in that situation once, it's always an available situation. Yeah. And I think it's incredibly commendable, and you probably don't give yourself anywhere near enough credit for the fact that because it is an available thing to you and you haven't revisited it, that is far more impressive and powerful than someone who's never been in that situation and therefore hasn't had to consider that as a real option.
That's not something I'd really thought about.
So that there you go. And that's something to genuinely think about, is if that ideation isn't going to go away, at first thought, that might be a deeply depressing thing, that's something you've got to live with. But at the same time, that is an extra power that you actually have enabled, and you are stronger to a degree than you were before that happened.
That's it. I think, look, everything that you do in life or that happens to you in life is, and this isn't, this is really kind of generic sort of philosophy, isn't it? But everything that happens to you in life and everything you do in life shapes the person you are right now. And I would not be sitting here doing these things with you if I had obviously gone through with it, but also if I hadn't even got to that situation in the first place, because I would not have then had to make a really big change in my life, understanding why things were the way they were, and, you know, take back every single point up to that. It leads to that point, but that led me to here. And I am happy, successful, like doing pretty well in a totally, I never thought I'd be doing social media. Like, asked me that a year ago and I'd have been like, absolutely not. And then now it's this kind of bizarre thing where I'm doing this and I've got my own business and I'm actually setting up a load of other businesses as well. And stuff is going so well. And it's sometimes just, you've got to pinch yourself and just think, how did I end up here? And actually a large part of that is because that singular moment helped me to define what my future would not be. And I would also say that actually, yeah, my kind of catchphrase as of basically straight after that moment was fuck it, why not? And fuck it, why not is not saying yes to everything, but it's deep taking yourself out of your comfort zone. When someone says, oh, do you want to do this? And you'd be like, yeah, fuck it, why not? Right. And I've done so many cool things because of it. And that doesn't mean if you hate bungee jumping, you don't have to go bungee jumping, right? But it means that if somebody kind of offers you the chance and you don't really, just do it.
On that point, that's something else that you have kind of alluded to. And this is the beautiful thing about listener questions, if you weren't aware. The array of questions and how random they can seem, in that we've just asked a really deep question and had a deep conversation. The next question I've got is from Finley, asking why the shagging elephant tattoo?
Oh my God, amazing. So, right. So if anyone doesn't know, right, I have 2 elephants doing the unspeakable on my right arse cheek. It's a regimental tattoo from the Light Dragoons. And it comes from basically the regiment has all these, they're called the Asai elephant. So it's from the Battle of Asai out in India, like back during sort of Empire days. And it was the first battle honour ever awarded to a regiment. So now if you look at where the sort of, you have the big, what essentially for all intents, we call them colours, but like the standards of the regiments, they all have words on them. And so you'll see for the Parachute Regiment, for example, you know, they have things like on them, and obviously it were pretty, that was obviously just gone, but it's lists of these battles. But before it became the standard procedure to write them like that, the regiment was given the right to wear an elephant. And this got branded, as the story goes, got branded on everything because the regiment was so proud of it, and it was like meant to be this distinguishing feature. And then, so back in the 80s, I think they really started like trying to revive all this stuff and why the regiment was different to all the others. And every regiment does this, right? But it got so overused that the junior officers were like, we just can't, we've got to stop with this. So they got sort of shaggy elephants. They had them done on ties, but really, really small, and like bow ties and things like that. But so that to them, they knew it was like an in-joke. They were wearing it, but no one did. We then decided, we took it one step further and decided to get tattoos done, and got one of our soldiers to design it. And he was going to do the tattoo as well. And then our commanding officer found out, he got wind of it and published orders immediately, said no tattooing to be done on camp, no member of the regiment to tattoo another one, etc., etc. So the guy scrambled up the piece of paper, threw it in the bin. We then thought, screw it, let's get it done in Fulham, obviously. So we got him to take it out of the bin, unfold the paper, take a picture of it, send it to us. And now there is a tattoo artist in Fulham that has a picture of a scrumpled up drawing of 2 elephants having sex, and every junior officer in the Light Dragoons, as far as I still know, you know, this was only a few years ago when I left, and it was exactly then, on completion of their reconnaissance course, gets that tattoo done on their backside.
I love that.
And then when you have your meetups every year at Cavalry Memorial, there is inevitably a picture after a couple of drinks where everyone's got their trousers down and squeezed far too close together. And because it's all on the same side, you're all that in the same direction with the glasses up. And no, I will never post that picture on my Instagram.
Thank you for never posting that picture. And the final question, I've actually written Pilk. I couldn't really figure out your Instagram name. I'm really sorry. There was quite a lot going on there. How has your military training impacted your fitness and your influencing today?
So I think because the military has a very defined set of standards you have to meet. It also has such a varied range of tasks you must complete, that I love the concept of kind of functional training. But then the army used to be very cardio based, loads of running, lots of like, they call it rucking in the, you know, you've probably seen like go ruck, but we actually call it tabbing in the army, or yomping in the Marines. Rucking's an American term for it. But it was all very legs and cardio. So I would then spend more time trying to get functional fitness in and, doing weights and whatever. And then they've changed it up now and do a lot of functional fitness. And we started this thing called British Army Warrior Fit, because they obviously don't want to pay the CrossFit license. So we created like a functional fitness sort of games as well and all of that. And I think it was just this requirement in your job to be fit. As an officer, this is probably the most important bit actually, as an officer, you must be fitter than your soldiers. If you are not, or you are going to struggle to be, don't even bother. Don't bother. It is the one thing that is completely controllable in your life is your level of fitness. And if you do not put in that extra level of effort to be fitter than your soldiers, whether out in the field carrying heavy stuff or running around in camp or whatever it is, don't bother. Don't join the army. And so taking that forwards is my ability to use all these different styles of training, mix it together, and my experience as a sort of, I say a coach, a leader for 10 years, then put it all together to then be able to coach my clients into a way of doing it. And also because I love it. And nothing really scares me anymore. I can just, if someone says, do you want to go run a marathon tomorrow? I mean, I'd hate it.
It will suck.
Yeah.
But
well, we did a marathon as a regiment. We did one and we flew out to Budapest and we drank solidly from Thursday evening in North Yorkshire, didn't go to bed, drank right the way through till Sunday morning in Budapest, and then ran the marathon in 4 hours. Like, it was the worst experience of my life, but we did it. But now if someone said, do you want to do that tomorrow? I know that my level of fitness is good enough that I could get around it. If somebody said, do you want to go and enter a strongman competition? I'm not going to win it, but I know that I can go and lift stuff up. If somebody said, do you want to go do high rocks? I could go and give it a good shot. And then if somebody said, do you want to go swim or paddleboard, or do you want to go hike up over the hills? My style of training is thus that I can do, I never want to have to train specifically for an event that somebody kind of brings up on the hoof. So a Saturday morning, someone goes, oh, screw it, let's not go to run club. Let's go and do CrossFit. Okay, sure. I'm not worried about doing that. And I think that is where, if you are disciplined with your training, you can achieve so many things. It's quite a waffly answer.
No,
but
I think what it basically lends its hand to is fitness. You can define fitness in very different ways, but for a lot of people in an understanding now, especially with cross-functional events becoming more popular, for those that have moved on from a team sport or a one-dimensional sport, the understanding that actually you can make your body not just a precision tool for one thing, but actually being a general tool for a lot of things. I mean, it's the like jack of all trades, master of none.
Are we gonna say it? Be a hybrid athlete.
A hybrid athlete.
Yeah, exactly.
Means you might be able to trot and
average lifter, shit runner.
Yeah, exactly that.
Yeah.
But the fact that you can be an average lifter and a shit runner and have a cool name, has opened doors for a lot of people. And it's actually, I mean, as a average runner and shit lifter, it's not a bad place to be.
No, it's not. And I absolutely love the fact that it has opened, as you say, it's opened the doors to people to go and do things that they didn't necessarily think they would do before. I mean, look at high rocks, right? Okay, yes, it's hijacked by PTs who want those slightly dark, grainy photos of them running across topless over the thing, right? You've got some.
I'm not PT and I'm not doing the coaching.
Have you not done high rocks though?
I may have done a high rock.
Is there not?
I may also be doing a high rock.
Yeah, and is there not a picture of you? Is there not a picture of you?
I'm sure there is.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sure there is.
But everybody loves those photos, and I think that's what's really cool, because it's one of those things that actually, it's driving people in to go. My little sister, I think, has just signed up for one, which, I mean, I will pay money to watch that. But, that is not her style of training at all. She just goes to the gym and she kind of cycles a bit. But now she's going to go and do a high rocks. Now, I mean, honestly, I will sit there with popcorn and watch it because I think she's going to swear her whole way through it. But she's going to do it, and it's opened up an entirely new event to go and do it with a friend, to go and do something else. And anything that makes people more active, more conscious about the way they live and their health can only be a good thing. We live in like this horrendously sort of obese, inactive world we've created for ourselves because life is so easy, sort of fundamentally, that we need to drive this forwards. And well done High Rocks, by the way, for capitalizing on it. Like, what a business model, right? They took CrossFit and they went, let's slightly change the name and be less creative with the amount of exercises. And we'll charge people a fortune to do it. And everyone went, take my money.
Yeah, it's basically become the new marathon.
Yeah, exactly.
It's more accessible, and you can kind of have a bit more fun because you don't need to be like, you don't have to put the same number of hours into the same thing. I mean, running is still a fundamental part of it, but you don't need to be doing a 35k on a weekend because you've got to get your volume up. If you don't want to, you can actually just rock up and do a high rocks and not die.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it was, yeah. I mean, I didn't do any training for the marathon either. We were forced
Well,
to. Do
that's the thing. I think to a degree, and this is something we've discovered with some other guests. So if you are interested in those discussions, by all means, go back and check it out. But with ultra marathon runners as well, once you, it's a confidence thing. Once you know that you're in a physical fit ability and you have the mentality to push through that pain, there aren't many people that have done one that then could never do one again on the spur. But until you do that, or until you have decided you have the mental resilience from other things that give you that confidence, you're not going to be able to do it, which is why it's huge for people when they sign up to London Marathon and get the chance to do it. It's quite exciting from the perspective of they might not realize it at the time, but once they've done that, they've unlocked something for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't get me wrong. Like, I personally will, I mean, I made my words, but I will never run a marathon again. Right? It is not my sport. I am 5'10", 85 kilos. Right? I'm sort of obese on the BMI scale. Like, I'm not built for marathon running. These little legs, right, have to, compared to you, right, I have to take about 3 strides compared to you. And so it's just not something that I enjoy. But I would say the experience of doing it, even with the world's worst hangover, right, was still extremely enjoyable. The crippling body pains afterwards were not, but it's ticked off the list. It's something I can do, and if I had to go and do one, I could do it.
That's the big thing.
And I totally agree. And I think High Rocks is even it engenders a feeling of fitness in people because it's functional sports. It's totally different things. You're doing all these different things. Okay, hopefully you never have to push a 200 kilo sled anywhere, but guess what? Like, it's also kind of a thing. Like, if you saw a car like sat on the side of the road, guess what? You could probably grab your mate and you realize you could actually push that car into the lay-by when it's broken down. I think that kind of thing is great to get people back into this mindset. What I hope is that it doesn't just get hijacked by the fitness community that puts other people off it, because that's not what it's for.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a fine line of that at the moment. But in effect, they've done a decent job by bringing in the whole ballot process early on. So you aren't just getting the elite athletes who are able to get the tickets. It does suck to a degree for some of those elite athletes that can't get their ticket to qualify for competition. But yeah. Anyway, I want to move on to some advice. So another section that we do on the podcast as we tail off towards the end is we get some quick bits of advice from each guest for a younger version of themselves. So this is literally removing myself from my own podcast for a moment. And I want you to imagine that there may be 1 or 3 different versions of yourself. And I want to know what 3 pieces of advice you would tell that version of Harry.
One is just really basic. One is protect your hearing. And this is probably quite a niche one to me, but my hearing is completely gone, right? I am like technically classed as, I have been prescribed hearing aids by the NHS because I've been around explosions and stuff like that. So protect your hearing, because it's something that will never come back. Now that's a very personal one, but I wish I could go back and do that. I would say sort of something towards me when I was at sort of in that stage between university, sort of a couple of years into the army, and that sort of end of university phase. I think be more confident in your own decisions. And whilst I think that's probably something a lot of people would say to themselves about being more confident or believe in yourself, it's not quite believe in yourself. It's you know you're making the right decisions, but be more confident in like who you're telling them to, and explain. You don't need to explain yourself for every time you do everything. Sometimes just saying it is good enough, and people will respect that. And I definitely did learn that later on, because it turned out they were right. But it takes a bit of getting used to. And a third piece. I think is fuck it, why not? Absolutely. I am convinced that has played a huge part in my sort of recovery post sort of dark times, by simply allowing myself to, or encouraging myself to get out of my comfort zone. Even though I've lived my life out of my comfort zone, I sort of retracted back into it and then was allowed to push myself out. And yeah, fuck it, why not? And just to be super clear, it doesn't mean saying yes to everything, because that can get you in trouble.
Yeah, of course.
But anything that is even moderately achievable, not totally reckless, and totally different. I would say it because I spent too long not doing it. And then I'm sure there's loads of stuff that we would all say to ourselves when we're younger and to others, don't worry about what others think and all that stuff. And I think all of those are true as well. But
I like the questions though, because and the advice, because they are specific to you. But again, people that resonate with you will take some of those. But I think it's different because if you do ask someone, give some advice for a younger person, they will always flip back to the typical thing. And someone that isn't taking care of their hearing right now might be thinking, shit, let me turn it down. Angus sounds pretty loud right now.
Like the ringing is horrendous, right? It doesn't stop. I have just constant ringing. Yeah, it's awful. It's awful. And I wish that I'd done something about it. And when I did my hearing test and you see the graph and it shows you like where you can't hear. So for me, it's actually at like human voice sort of mid-ranges, so I really struggle. Like I can't watch TV without subtitles. It's that bad.
Yeah.
Thank God Gen Z watches TV with subtitles.
I was going to say, I do that
honestly.
anyway.
Yeah, thank God, because I actually can't hear it otherwise. So
there was again, I seem to just be able to throw back to a lot of episodes, but this is what I mean by the type of guest that I managed to get on. There's a guy called Urian who's cycling around the world at the moment. He's doing that because he's had a mental struggle due to tinnitus. So his whole thing was music, and then he got tinnitus, and now he can't do music. And so in order to try and discover more about himself and attack his own bad mental health, he's cycling around the world, throwing himself into situations which he's not used to, and he's done other things before that. So he tried, and you might be able to tell what area of Europe he's from with this, but he was able to try psychedelic mushrooms in a medical environment, and so he tried that and gave it a go, and he said it was really cool, but it definitely didn't change his life for the long term, and that's why he's basically gone out on an expedition.
So, I mean, honestly, both of those things, one, psychedelics, and two, cycling around the world by yourself, mate, those are the two scariest things I could think of. How much time are you in your own head then? Still, to this day, like, I'm way better at talking about stuff, I hope, as I've shown, but my God, I do not need extra time in my own head, especially when I can't rely on my faculties.
This is the thing that's interesting. This is obviously documenting this as he goes, and so you get to see the good days and the bad days, and he's kind of re-exploring that. But there are times as well where there's the raw, I can't remember the name of the place, I think it's in Turkey, but you'll see it on, Thomas Cook's travel agency board, but all the hot air balloons, that place, he camped there. Yeah. And so it's like, there are points in his life where he had a really shit day, and then he gets to open his tent and see that, and he's like, do you know what? Things can't be that bad.
I've got a mate who, a really fascinating guy actually, and he cycled around the world as well. And he did it after he left the army. But pre-army, he had been the youngest Brit to climb each of the highest peak on every continent. And he is an extremely high-achieving individual, right? Climbed Everest by 21 or whatever and all this kind of stuff. But he went cycling around the world, and it was so interesting just when he would send me pictures and stuff, and he was like, oh yeah, tonight I just camped in a pop-up tent under a bridge in the middle of a desert in China. And I was like, dude, you're right. He was like, yeah, it's actually really peaceful. I was like, okay. We have such a different idea of life. I mean, the thing is, I know if I were there, I'd probably absolutely love it. But the concept of being there, and it's because you haven't done the journey to get there. You've just, that's a good metaphor there, isn't it? Like because basically I can't transpose myself from this chair to that bridge right now. But he'd been on his bike for 300 days. He was like, a bridge, luxury.
Yeah, true, exactly.
And I think it's just fascinating when you see people like doing that. Just incredible feats of endurance.
Yeah.
I'm not an endurance athlete. That's
not yet. Not yet. Wait till that first high rock. The last part of this podcast is an idea that I absolutely stole from other podcasts, where we have the previous guest question. So each guest from each episode asks a question directly to the next guest. So the last episode we had was actually someone who is a world record holder in high rocks, and his name is Travis Owls. His question to you was, if you could be doing any other thing as a career right now, what would it be and why?
I always wanted to go into the kind of the Foreign Service diplomatic corps. That was genuinely so high on my list, was to go and become a diplomat. And I think it actually is very similar in some ways to the sort of military aspect. I think, you're just traveling around meeting new people. I speak a bunch of languages. So my degree was French and Spanish. I also did German A-level. Learned a bit of Chinese, but I was rubbish at it. But I just think that's a fascinating career, to be in that really high level engagement between nation states, but also the work that they do behind the scenes. I just say everything about it is fascinating. And if you're an ambassador, and I've had the pleasure, and again, it's probably strange because you sort of forget most people don't meet ambassadors. And I've met many ambassadors in their countries, and the work that they do is, on one side, they're dealing with highly sensitive sort of, maybe there's military operations going on in the vicinity or something like that. And they are, of course, read into this. The diplomatic efforts between us and the host country, and then, charitable work that might be going on where UK aid is building a school or helping to combat climate change or whatever. And they are absolutely involved in that. It's such a varied thing. And I think just huge. I have so much respect for people who do that. So yeah, I think that.
Interesting. Okay, and I need to follow that with asking your question for the next guest, but I'm not allowed to tell you anything about who they are or what they do.
Okay. So I'm going to go with a classic, I think. Would you rather fight a horse-sized duck or 10 duck-sized horses?
And I'm going to pretend that you said this bit as well, but I want to know what their approach or tactics would be for whatever their choice is.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's fundamental.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can't just give an answer and not explain it. Yeah, absolutely.
Out of interest, what would your answer be to that question?
Yeah, it's a hard one, isn't it? I think it's probably the 10, because I feel like if you just really go for it, you're going to be okay. Right, there's a lot of kicking involved, isn't there? And I feel like if you just really get to town, you're probably going to win. And I assume that would be the RSPCA that are going to be ringing us right now.
Yeah, I can't imagine that they're going to get too involved with the podcast anytime soon. But I think I'd probably agree. The idea of a beak that big nipping away at me is quite tough. And wings being that big.
Well, that's the thing, right? I have a total fear of swans as well. So, honestly, a horse-sized duck, mate, is absolutely terrifying.
Yeah. So I think we're agreed on that. That's sort of. But we'll see if the next guest backs himself against a horse-sized duck. Guys, if you're interested in seeing the response to that, or you want to go back and check out any of the other episodes that I've mentioned here, please do so. You're in the right place for it. Likewise, if you want to check out the links that we've mentioned, please just head down to the description. If you're here from the Mindsets or you've discovered the podcast today, welcome. You can check out Harry's social media and get in contact with him. I will put all of the information down below. As he said, your username is resurgent_Harry. Likewise, if you come here from any other form or from Harry's page, then this is mindsets_podcast. And you can use that on all forms of social media and you'll find the podcast. If you think you found it and it isn't that, then it isn't me. Please report it and let me know. But please, guys, if you have enjoyed this episode, you enjoyed the variety of the sort of topics, but you also enjoyed the depth and the realness that people like Harry are able to go into, please do give it a share. It means a lot. And through things like the listener questions, but also other things on the Instagram story, there's plenty of opportunities to get involved. I want this to be a thing that we grow, not just a thing that I grow, because I don't have enough hands. So thank you very, very much, Harry, for coming along today.
No, mate, thank you for having me.
And thank you very much for opening up and sharing about so much. And thank you all for listening. And I look forward to seeing you all in the next episode.